This video lecture goes over item writing guidelines for constructed response items, short answer, and essay. Again, this lesson comes from and is inspired by my professor, Dr. Carol Myford. So anything that's fantastic is hers and anything that's a hot mess is mine. What are constructed response items? These are items where students generate a response or an answer to an item. So we'll focus on how you make them on traditional paper and pencil items, but you can also do any of the same things with the digital assessment as well. We're going to talk about two main types of items, short answer items and essay items. There are a lot of reasons you want to use constructed response items in your classroom. The responses more closely approximate real-world behavior, and they're typically measuring higher level skills and knowledge. Short answer items require students to use a word, a phrase, a sentence, and the response can either be a direct question or an incomplete statement, and typically they measure relatively simple learning outcomes. When you're writing short answer questions, you want to make sure you employ direct questions rather than an incomplete statement, especially for younger students. You want to structure the item so the response is concise. You want to place blanks in the margin for direct questions or near the end of incomplete statements. And for incomplete statements, use only one or at most two blanks. You also want to make sure that all the blanks for all items are equal in length, so you're not giving away any clues, but based on the length of the blank. Take a moment to write down one of these reasons and why you think that it's important. So short answer and completion items. Short answer is when there's a direct question that they supply an answer in a word, phrase, sentence, name, number, or symbol. A completion item is one where there's an incomplete statement and that can be answered by supplying a word, phrase, name, number, or symbol. They're relatively easy to construct. It reduces the possibility that students get the right answer by guessing, and it can assess a broad range of knowledge. Because the responses are produced by the student, partial knowledge is not sufficient. You have to actually know the answer to get it right. Short answer and completion items also have some limitations. They're mainly useful for measuring recall of memorized information. They're not as well suited for measuring complex learning outcomes, except maybe in math or science. They're more difficult to score because there's more varying degrees of correctness that need to be considered. Scoring can also be contaminated by students' spelling abilities, and scoring can result in an inaccurate representation of students' abilities if you're not careful. When you format your short answer items, you want a set of complete questions. You want to line up the answer blanks in a column to the right of the question. It makes it easier for the students to respond and for you to check their answers. I want you to take a second to write down what you think is wrong with these items. These could be entire essays, an entire book about who was Hernando de Soto and what did he do. So you want to make sure that your question limits what they can say. So be specific about what you want them to tell you about Hernando de Soto. So word the item so that the required answer is both brief and specific. You also want to make certain there's only one possible correct answer for the item. So for this one, what Spanish explorer led the first expedition across the southeastern United States? What's wrong with this item? There's a clue. Because it says "an," you know that that word has to start with a vowel. So instead, if you put parentheses around the "n," it could be "a" or "an," and you're not giving an unintended clue. Don't give them clues to the answer when crafting the item. Make sure that you make it so that anything could be an answer. What's wrong with these items? We know the cognitive load of answering questions is greater when you put the blank at the front because you have to hold that blank in your head while you're reading the rest of the sentence. If you put the blank at the end, they only have to hold the rest of the sentence in their head, not the blank as well. To correct this item, you want to make sure that the blanks are near the end. It prevents awkward sentences and it sets the problem up appropriately. So instead, the largest object in the solar system is the blank. The closest planet to the sun is called blank. What's wrong with this item? The is a group of that break down of. This one's Swiss cheese. I have no idea what this is talking about. It could be one of a 1,000 different things. When completion items are used, don't include too many blanks. At most, 1 or 2. Instead, a group of organisms that break down the chemical components of food is called the blank blank. What's wrong with this item? You're giving a clue. Because of the length of the blanks, you want to make sure that you're not giving a clue. The answer is Robert Louis Stevenson. It tells you that Stevenson is the longest word, and so you've unintentionally told them that they're looking for an author with 3 names and a longer last name. Use blanks of equal length. Just give them 1 line to write the author's name. My favorite types of completion questions come from The Writing Revolution by Judith Hochman and Natalie Wexler. One strategy they use is called because, but, so. Because explains why something is true, but indicates a change of direction like a U-turn. So tells us what happens as a result of something else, in other words, a cause and its effect. So, for example, graphic organizers can help students understand text structures because it makes the text structure visible to students, but you have to teach them how to use graphic organizers. So make sure that you take your time to teach your students how to use the graphic organizers and understand different text structures. It makes them think about a topic, a concept, an idea more deeply. Some examples from history. If you're thinking about westward expansion, the first transcontinental railroad stretched from blank to blank. Building the railroad was tough, hard work because blank. Without the help of Sacagawea, the Lewis and Clark expedition blank. So they have to understand the content and material in order to be successful. For essay items, this is where you're looking for about a paragraph or more, depending on the age and ability level of your students. You're looking for the students' abilities to synthesize, evaluate, and compose texts, and typically they're used to measure more complex learning outcomes. Advantages, they are able to measure complex learning outcomes. They can measure more than one outcome, but it's difficult to write items properly and to score reliably. These are item writing guidelines from essays from Popham and his classroom assessment textbook. You want to convey students a clear idea regarding the extensiveness of the response desired. You want to be explicit. If you want them to write 3 paragraphs, tell them that. If you want them to include 5 supporting details, have them that written in the instructions. You want to construct items so the student's task is explicitly described. One student writing 1 paragraph, another student writing a 5-paragraph essay, you can't really fairly compare them because one student had 5 paragraphs to convey their idea, so they could have lots of misinformation in there but still technically cover the concept, where the one student who only wrote a paragraph had to get that idea in there quickly. So if you tell them exactly what you're looking for, how many pages, how many paragraphs, etc., the better off they're going to be. Provide students with the approximate time to expend on each item, as well as each item's value. So if you have an item at the beginning that's worth 5 points, that's a shorter essay or a shorter item, you want to make sure that they're spending less time on that item than their final essay where they're supposed to be doing a larger task and it's worth 25 points. By telling them the values of each item, they learn what is important and can better allocate their time. Precursively judge an item's quality by composing mentally or in writing a possible response. So you want to make sure that you know what your final product should look like. What are you looking for from students? Sometimes you'll think that it is possible to answer a question in a paragraph, but then you try it out either on paper or in your head and you discover, no, there's too many pieces that are required to fully describe this idea. It will take at least 2 or 3 paragraphs. Without going through the process of testing out your item yourself, it leads you to be more likely to have items that are not working for you correctly. Take a moment to choose one of these items and write a sentence or two about why that item is important when you're creating your essay questions. When you're scoring essay responses, you can choose to score them holistically, everything gets 1 score, or analytically. Each piece gets its own score. You want to have a tentative scoring key in advance of judging students' responses, and you want to make decisions regarding the importance of mechanics of writing prior to scoring. You want that score to be separate from the other scores that you're judging them on, because you want to know if they've mastered the content. Writing mechanics should be scored separately. You also want to score responses to one item before scoring the responses to the next item. So if there are 4 essay items for a final exam, score essay 1 for all students, then essay 2 for all students, and essay 3 for all students. And then as far as possible, evaluate their responses anonymously. That way, they all have a clean slate and can show you exactly what they do. It's also really important to go back and regrade the first few items that you score for any item, because you might discover that you were really hard on the first 5, and then by the time you get to the end, you've let up on your scoring, so you're giving people more grace. So by going back and rescoring the first few, you make sure that you're consistent. When you do that, you keep scoring until you discover that your scores are consistent. Take a moment and write down one reason and idea that you take from these scoring guidelines. When you are scoring essays, you want to think about whether or not it's useful to use a holistic or an analytical scoring rubric. Holistic scoring focuses on the entire response as a whole, and it reflects their overall performance. Analytical scoring assigns points to each factor and identifies students' strengths and weaknesses, but it ignores the overall quality of the response. When you're thinking about holistic scoring criteria, you might think about their organization, their clarity, their adaptation to the audience, their word choice, and their mechanics. All of that then gets 1 score. So if you were doing scoring criteria for a debate class, you would, for scoring an essay item with a rebuttal preparation, you would look at their anticipation of the opponent's positive points, support for one's own points attacked by opponents, isolation of suitably compelling examples, and a preparation of a spontaneous conclusion. Here you want to break down the points for analytical scoring. So you're going to give points for organization, communicative clarity, audience adaptation, word choice, mechanics. If they're outstanding, they get 3 points, satisfactory, they get 2, and unacceptable, they get 1. So the scores can range, and then you want to decide what each score is worth in the gradebook. So if you're thinking about a holistic scoring key for a U.S. history, when presented with a description of a real-world problem in the United States, students will be able to cite 1 or more significant events in American history that are particularly relevant to the presented problem solution. 2, defend the relevance of the cited events. 3, propose a solution to the presented problem. And 4, use historical parallels from the cited events to support the proposed solution. To turn this into an analytic guide, you could have it be strong, acceptable, weak, and get points for each component. What you notice here is that some pieces are weighted more heavily than others. So for the defense of cited historical events, the highest number of points you can get for that is 20 points. But then when you get to the final one, the historical solution, support of the proposed solution, that's worth up to 40 points. And so you want to think about what parts of the task are more important and weight them so that more important parts have more value in your scoring guide. You also want to decide ahead of time how important writing mechanics are to scoring and score all responses to one item at a time and build in student anonymity. After you've created your test, you want to look at all of your students' responses. Is there a question that many of your students got wrong? Did you not fully teach the material? Do you need to reteach it and reassess? Don't penalize students for not teaching the material. Is the test item flawed? Everyone gets full credit for the question. For me, if I have more than half of my students get a question wrong on a test, I throw it out. Everybody gets full credit, and I just feel like that's more fair. It tells me that either I didn't teach the material in a way the students understood, or there was something wrong with that item, so I need to correct it before I use that item again. You want to start with your learning objectives when building your test. What did you set out to do to teach your students? Make a list of your learning outcomes and determine the best way to assess those outcomes. You want to start from your content statements. What is it that you are required by the state to teach your students? How are the best ways for students to demonstrate their knowledge of that material? Sometimes, if it's vocabulary, you're looking to see if they've mastered the understanding. A matching activity is perfect for that. Match the definition to the word. Other times, it's a higher level skills that's going to require them to write an essay or at least a few sentences. Measurable learning outcomes for those standards on the previous slide. Students will identify what all plants need to survive. Students will compare different adaptations plants have to help them survive in different environments. Based on those learning outcomes, I then have to decide, how do I best measure those? This is an example of a table specifications for a U.S. Constitution unit in a middle school class. So it's got Bloom's taxonomy from level 1, remembering, to number 6, creating. And then it has the content that they want covered. And so the teacher spread out the items to make sure that everything that was taught and was important was assessed, and that the number that she was assessing between high and low level skills, and that she adequately covered everything she taught during that unit.